Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 UK Active National Summit. I am Andrew Lansley, and it is my great honour and privilege to be your chair for this, the 2020 Summit. It is, in fact, the fourth occasion when I have had the privilege of chairing the UK Active National Summit. Every time I have been deeply impressed by the creativity and the enterprise shown by this sector. This year, of course, we meet under traumatic circumstances. So many people suffering as a consequence of the pandemic. A second lockdown starting tonight. So many great people and good businesses at risk. In a moment, we will hear from Tanni Gray-Thompson. She and Hugh and all the UK Active team have been magnificent in the leadership they have given and the example the sector has set. We all know that gyms and leisure centres made themselves COVID secure. From July to October, below one case per 100,000 visits. Yes, below 1 in 100,000. So it is possible, in my view, necessary, that people are able to maintain their exercise all through this long winter. The benefits in physical and mental health far outweigh the risks. It's down to all of us to get this message through. This afternoon, we will hear from several keynote speakers. You can see now from the agenda, we're going to hear from Baroness Tanni Gray-Thompson, the chair of UK Active, from Ben Page, the Chief Executive Officer at Ipsos Mori, from Joe Stevens, the Shadow Secretary of State for Digital Media, Culture and Sport. We'll hear later from Rebecca Marmot, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, from Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and we will get some video messages from other political leaders too. Time, I'm afraid today, will not allow us to take questions to all of your speakers. So I will be making sure that the team are picking up the Q&A that you may put on your Q&A function, and they will be able to be fed into the discussions that we have in the next 3 weeks ahead. I just want to make sure you know that the session is being recorded. All those who are participating will have been muted upon entry. And if for any reason your connection should break, do please join again with the same link that you joined in the first place. I want to express some warm thanks. Warm thanks to the City of London Corporation and to Sport England, and indeed to all our strategic partners whom you can see on this slide. Without their support, the National Summit would not be possible and it wouldn't be the great event that it is. Now, our National Summit this year, as every year, is about looking forward. And we must look forward, despite the circumstances, to beyond COVID and the opportunities that there will be in future for physical activity in a transformed society. And who better to initiate our discussions to that subject than our National Chair of UK Active, Baroness Tanni Gray-Thompson. Over to you, Tanni.
Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank you personally for the counsel you provided me and the team at UK Active, especially during this crisis. We really couldn't do it without you, and your kindness means a lot to us. And thank you to everyone who is taking time out to join us this afternoon. Also, a huge thank you to all our speakers for joining the summit over the coming month and for the stimulating discussion and cultivating innovation that is so important to our sector. To start with, I think it's important to address the second national lockdown in England that will start tonight. Since the reopening of fitness and leisure facilities from July, the sector collectively came together to collaborate every single week to build a case and track record of safety and professionalism of our sector. In the face of frustration, delay and a lack of financial support, we dusted ourselves off and came together to advocate for the sector. UK Active has brought organisations together, led the advocacy for the sector and supported our members. And I'm very proud that UK Active has represented and championed the sector during this difficult time and for numerous local battles. In response, our members have displayed responsibility, sensitivity to people's fears and anxieties, and also great innovation so that people across the country have been able to rely on our services at such an acute time for our collective health. UK Active's Open Doors programme has built bridges between schools and local community providers, providing safe spaces during school holidays for the most vulnerable children to play, eat and socialise at a time of extreme isolation and instability for young people. And it's been fulfilling to witness the sector come together to collaborate on the evidence to allow UK Active to make the case for reopening and argue its case as an essential service. This was amplified during the Great British Week of Sport and National Fitness Day campaigns, which showed how popular and desired physical activity is in communities all across the UK. On National Fitness Day itself, a record number of people were inspired to be active, with 19 million people joining the celebrations, smashing the campaign target of 10 million and making it the most successful National Fitness Day to date. Added to this, a national poll showed a record of 8.7 million children took part in physical activity on National Fitness Day, an increase of more than 6 million on 2019. And this was partly inspired by schools taking part in a synchronised 10 minutes of activity at 10 AM, the 10 at 10 initiative. In all, it was a pretty phenomenal result. And these kind of campaign weeks show how much potential we have and the power of our sector. Furthermore, we've seen our members stay open in Scotland and Northern Ireland as the restrictions tightened, and throughout all the decisions in England to take areas into Tier 3, including the U-turn in Liverpool. Hence, the overwhelming frustration of this weekend's decision. As it stands, gyms and public leisure spaces in England will be closed until December the 2nd in England. And while we have great sympathy for the Westminster government making difficult choices at this time, this decision is incredibly disappointing on many levels. There are many people all over the country who have been thinking how to get fitter and healthier along with their families. And they would have been looking to our sector to support them during this tough winter to do just that. And it does feel like such a misstep that the government has not heeded our strong and continuous calls to categorise our sector as essential and acknowledge the astonishing safety standards that our sector has sustained throughout this period. I fear that this will have severe repercussions for the nation. We know from Sport England's recent Active Live survey that activity levels fell sharply during the first lockdown. Also, analysis from SAGE has warned us that health inequalities among some vulnerable and Black Asian minority ethnic groups will increase during the winter lockdown period. I share the frustrations of members who play an essential role for communities across the country and have proven their ability to make their facilities COVID safe. I understand the real anxiety that this second national lockdown will lead to business failure and major job losses within the sector. And I fear the damage that this lockdown will mean for the physical and mental well-being of the millions of people of all ages and backgrounds that depend on our sector. I also fear the new lockdown measures brought in to combat this crisis could well fuel another crisis in inactivity and mental health, unless we see a plan for addressing this. To this end, myself and the team will continue to work tirelessly to represent and champion the needs of our members at this time, doing everything within our power and influence to convince our government of the essential service our sector provides. However, I also believe that genuine change can only start with an honest appraisal of how we feel as a sector. This COVID storm has battered the whole of sport and physical activity sector leading to much damage and loss. My personal story is that of the sector, and it's heartbreaking to see former colleagues and friends lose their jobs, clubs, organisations, and their fight for survival. And I know that this is reflected in many stories across the sector. In the midst of the storm, one thing is really important, and that is the support of our government. We need to believe our government has our back, that it understands the scale of the challenge that we face, that it recognises the support we require, that it values the considerable role our sector plays in the physical, mental and social wellbeing of communities and people all over the country. It's with a heavy heart that I feel there's a growing number across sport and physical activity who don't truly believe the government appreciates this right now, and we must work together to change that. Today, I want to call upon government to urgently bring together a diverse set of leaders from across the sector during this period of national lockdown, to have a real dialogue on both the survival of the sector and the full role it can play in our society's renewal. It needs a strategy. The government must develop the plans that I shared, along with 150 sector leaders with the Prime Minister in September. We need a recovery plan that brings together taxation and regulatory reform alongside investment that supports the sector to work its way out of the crisis. Furthermore, we need a fundamental shift in how our sector is valued across Whitehall. I have no doubt this can be achieved with sufficient will and energy from all sides, and this November lockdown is the moment to do just this. Failure to do so could be a tragic missed opportunity. It's really difficult to reflect right now, at a time when you feel you're in a daily battle for survival as this crisis continues unabated. Yet we should strive for that time, and we should take stock of what we've learned and how these learnings drive us forward as things change. I believe we're much better equipped than we were in March to deal with this crisis. We're in negotiations with the government, central, devolved and local across the UK. And we were in negotiations for each tier 3 closure prior to this national lockdown, which successfully saw our sector stay open. That showed how local leadership across England understood the value of the role of our members and the role they play in our communities. And at the heart of this change has been data and evidence we use to engage decision makers. Before the 25th of July, we had passion and anecdotes. But since the 25th of July, we've combined these assets with evidence, clearly showing our sector driving an extremely low prevalence of COVID. For too many years, the sector has effectively been left naked in our negotiations with government without sufficient evidence to support our calls. And one major lesson we must take away from this crisis is that sharing data, investment in evidence and research will go a long way to determine how we're perceived, understood and valued. We mustn't, at any cost, deviate from this path we're now on. We must also reflect on how standards will play an even bigger role in our sector going forward. In this period of great uncertainty, trust is everything. Trust of our members and consumers of our facilities. Trust of our lawmakers who determine our ability to operate. Trust of our future partners that we do provide an essential service. And this is just so much more than health and safety, but encompasses major societal issues that can define reputation. That's why I'm delighted that UK Active is working on a new sector standard. This standard, which covers the full scale of our sector from operators, suppliers and children's activity providers, will be developed with key partners and stakeholders, and crucially, with our members and customers. We'll consult on and develop this standard with the aim to roll out from spring 2021. The Active Standard will provide reassurance for customers that they're receiving the best possible service from UK Active members, support the management of reputational risks that occur from incidents, and help members access new partnerships across the wider health agenda. Fundamentally, it will provide each member with recognition that they've met a consistent set of standards. The ability to enhance a standard across the sector by capitalising on the collaboration of all sector channels shows the needs of a defined standard to evidence quality to stakeholders and wider society. The impact of the standard will ensure that members and the industry's reputation is protected moving forward, while further raising the value of our work. The active standard will have an all-encompassing, flexible approach, and we need this to consistently maintain the standards necessary to enhance the continued professionalism of the sector. Finally, history tells us that major moments such as this lead to changes in society. This crisis has exposed national health inequalities, along with burgeoning issues of physical and mental resilience and well-being. Health and fitness must form the bedrock upon which our society rebuilds itself. By investing in our health, we will gain greater resilience in the face of the next pandemic and reduce its impact on the NHS. Not only that, our physical and mental health will influence our happiness and well-being, our ability to be productive human beings, and affect how we contribute to the communities we live in. I've no doubt that the government will need to place more emphasis on addressing these issues, and it has begun to do so with early development of its obesity plans. But more needs to be done. The question for us is how we react to this change. Tasked with the required areas for progress across data, evidence and standards, I believe we can lead and not observe the coming change. With this reform, we can lead the change we seek and forge a relationship with the NHS that takes root and makes us an extension of its services. In 2016, at this very UK Active event in Westminster, Simon Stevens stood before leaders of the physical activity sector and shook a bottle of pills at us. This marked a seminal moment for the physical activity sector. He threw down the gauntlet to our sector. If you could pack all of that into a magic pill, it would be a worldwide pharmaceutical blockbuster, he said. But the label on the side of this treatment here is activity and exercise. The message was clear. We know the power of your product. Now show us how we can use it to its greatest effect. Now, we've not yet met that challenge, but we have begun to. We have to make real links to the NHS that have not existed previously and show that our facilities are safe places to be active. James Saunderson, Director of Personalised Care at NHS England, has said he's delighted to be working closely with UK Active, the National Academy for Social Prescribing and Sport England, to look at innovative models for the fitness and leisure industry to support social prescribing. Now is the time when the nation needs a relationship between the physical activity sector and the NHS. UK Active will create the foundation from which partners can accelerate the nation's recovery in each locality. The fitness and leisure industry is well placed to support people with increasingly complex problems to be more active, not just physically, but also socially and mentally. The leisure sector is ready to scale solutions for people with complex health problems and vulnerabilities to be more active by scaling an accessible portfolio of interventions, programs and services with targeted links to healthcare and behavioural change to drive users to these programs. This will provide a clear link and set the foundation for integration on national and local levels between primary care and the fitness and leisure sector and increase investment in this area. So in conclusion, it's a revolutionary time to work in our sector. I know that there are many challenges on the horizon, but the opportunities to come are vast. The main thought that I leave you with is to continue collaboration as a sector, keep believing and showing the value of all your organisations to society. And in spite of the struggles we presently face, keep your mind on the bigger goals ahead. I understand that this is a difficult time for all of us. The team at UK Active is here to support you every step of the way. I hope you enjoy Summit and are inspired by some of the amazing lineup of speakers that we have. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Thank you.
Tanny, thank you so much for that speech. One of the reasons, it's your leadership that has helped to ensure that UK Active is a trusted partner for government, will continue to be. And it's for that reason I hope that those in government listen to exactly to what you've said today and act upon it. Can I turn now to Ben Page? Delighted to have Ben here at the UK Active National Summit. Ben is Chief Executive Officer of Ipsos Mori, a writer and speaker on leadership, on trends, on performance management, and indeed, in my former life, and often a contributor to thinking about political trends and political action. He's worked with government. He's one of those rare beasts that people on every side of politics trust, Ben, because he's he is informed by the evidence rather than most of us who simply work on our prejudices. So we're delighted to have you with us, Ben. Can I hand over to you, Ben Page?
Thank you, Andrew. And we can talk about American polling as opposed to British polling in questions if you want to. But I'm going to share my screen and just take you through some of this because we are in interesting times. Hopefully everybody can see that. So what's going to happen? Of course, the answer is we don't know. Predictions are actually very hard about the future. And I think one of the challenges with the pandemic, with the dramatic changes in behavior that we've seen, is making assumptions that the entire world has changed permanently. If there was a pill available at Boots that you could take on Monday and a lot of things would return to where they've been quite quickly. But of course, that isn't going to happen. But we do need to be careful, as you will see. So we can see, of course, an immediate impact on our behaviours from this March. The year has worked out completely differently in all sorts of ways than many people were expecting. We can see a drop in activity. We estimate between 3.4 million more people became inactive during March and May compared to 2019. So a very dramatic fall, as of course, inevitably we were in lockdown. What did you think was going to happen? And when you look at what was acceptable in terms of the lockdown breaches during the last lockdown, when we polled people in May, the main one was spending more than 2 hours outside your home relaxing, along with going for a drive, and more people thought that was acceptable than unacceptable. So it will be interesting to see. Of course, you're allowed to go out in the new lockdown to exercise, but certainly exercise was definitely seen as one of the more valid reasons, rather than having a clean around or a nanny or something like that, or indeed going to see friends. There's been a bigger drop this year in activity among men than women, down 5 points among women, men 9 points. So that was interesting. We'll see how that plays out. But men have seen the biggest decline. Women, of course, tend to do more of the work in a domestic setting. And one of the things that's been very marked in this pandemic is the impact on mental health. And in particular, although everybody suffered from being locked up and unable to see their friends, interestingly, when we looked at which group of the population suffered the biggest challenge, and it'll be interesting to see if the hundreds of people on this call share that view, it was actually working age women with children at home, particularly when the schools were shut, who were reporting that they were feeling the most effects on their mental health. 45% of working mothers with kids at home saying that their mental health had suffered during lockdown. The other thing that we've seen, we already heard from the Baroness about the difference, the health outcomes that we've seen in terms of this by ethnicity, but there's also been a marked fall in activity from people from non-white British backgrounds, so particularly Black and Asian people. So among white British people, activity down from 66 to 60 in terms of the proportion of percentage of people we're saying who report being active, but much more marked among Black and Asian people. And again, that's just going to exacerbate some of the other health inequalities that we've seen. So I was really surprised at that, because of course the age profile of Black and Asian people is younger than the population as a whole. So I was surprised to see that drop, and I think that's worthy of further investigation, but some people on this call may know more about that than I did, but it certainly leapt out at me when I had a look at the data. So a 14-point decline compared to, say, a 6-point decline among white British people. So quite a marked difference. And as you know all too well, gym activities, and particularly swimming, have obviously suffered massively when we looked at who had been doing these things on a regular basis in the past, over the previous month. So inevitably a massive hit as the facilities are shut. Not particularly surprising, and swimming, of course, leisure centres, of course, research involved. And I think one of the challenges is around safety. So there's still this, the public is showing in many ways an excess of caution, you could say. Even now, more people tend to think the government isn't going far enough, as opposed to those who are saying it's doing more harm than good. So people are exceptionally cautious. I think it's something about the unknown quantity of the disease, and that whereas we're driving too fast or smoking or drinking too much, people feel in control of the level of risk that they're taking. Because this is an unknown disease, an invisible disease, kills people, of course, and increasingly people know somebody who's been very ill with it, and the risk of long COVID. We can see lots of anxiety. So 55% of people saying they're not feeling comfortable going to leisure centres, and that's one of the higher things. Only 1 in 5 comfortable with that, with going to indoor gyms or pools. In contrast, hairdressers or even going to a bar seen as a bit less of a problem. But overall, you've still got around 6 out of 10 people across the board, pretty much, apart from going to church, saying that they're worried about a whole range of activities. And this was in late June, just before we came out of lockdown. So lots of anxiety. At the same time, of course, we have had a polarised world. We've got a lot of people taking less exercise, but we do estimate about 13 million people in lockdown were doing things like Joe Wicks, exercising at home, using things like YouTube, etc., etc. And in a sense, there's been a polarisation. More people drinking more and smoking more, but also another load of people drinking less and smoking and taking some exercise. I'm actually 6 kilos lighter than when the year began. Partly because I got a bit out of control during the first lockdown, but in the second lockdown I am on it, and I am doing my exercise, and I am not eating as much, and I feel better for it. So overall, 13 million people doing some sort of fitness activity. And I think what we need to look for, and this is both positive and negative, even with a shock like COVID-19, our underlying values don't necessarily change overnight. If people wanted to exercise before, they still want to. It will take much longer for us to become people who are used to staying indoors and not doing anything. And, when we measure British public opinion, of course, we're looking at opinions which are the froth on the surface. They change from second to second. What did you think of that speech last night? We measure people's attitudes. Those are rather deeper. Maybe what do you think of the government of the day? And then, of course, we measure people's values. And these are things like, what do you think about the death penalty? What do you think about gay marriage? What do you think, do you think having children is important? Those types of things change much more slowly. And just to give you an idea about this, if you look at Britain over the last 20, 30 years, it's interesting how much has changed and how much hasn't changed. So if we go back to 1999, at this point, only 13% of the UK population was online. The war on terror, we didn't have that. We didn't know who Osama bin Laden was, or most of us didn't. Facebook didn't exist. WhatsApp didn't exist. Spotify didn't exist. The iPhone didn't exist. The financial crisis hadn't happened. Amazon Alexa didn't exist. So the world was a very different place in 1990. And yet, after all of that time, the proportion of people, when I looked last year, who said that they wanted to slow down the pace of their life, didn't really change. I fear technical progress is destroying our lives. Well, it was almost as high in the 90s as it is now. Being a CEO will make you happy. Achieving a prominent position in your chosen career will make you happy. Well, 3 in 10 people thought that last century, and 3 in 10 people think it now. So I think we need to be careful about assuming just everybody's going to completely change because of this pandemic. It is true on other dimensions. If I'd shown you attitudes to mental health, if I had shown you attitudes to homosexuality, you would see a big shift over the last 20 years, and particularly over the last 30 years. So that on many other things, we won't necessarily expect huge changes. So as we look at people's values around the world, what's interesting, of course, is just how diverse people are. What I'm showing you on this chart is a sort of computer analysis, so don't worry too much about it. It crunches hundreds and hundreds of questions from 33,000 people around the planet. And the further to the left you are, the more you are about keeping things the same. Perhaps the further to the right you are, the more you are about radical change. The further at the bottom of the chart, you might be a bit more wanting to protect things, and at the top, you might be a bit more open. So quite a lot of people possibly on this call, hedonists, pro-globalists maybe, believing that capitalism is a fairly good system, immortality through science, believing that medicine knows what it's doing. Down over here, and the further apart two sets of values are, the less likely you are to find one person who will share them. Here you've got the values of people who feel left behind, nostalgic for the past. Often parts of our country are like that. You can compare bits of metropolitan London in the top left and other parts of our country's values on the right. Sort of more populist, believing in a revolt against the elites, feeling overwhelmed, nostalgic for a better past. Donald Trump, who is doing better than a lot of people expected, traditional nationalists, my country, right or wrong, tired of environmentalists and environmentalism, believing that men have traditional gender roles, women know your place, very, very different. And over here, the values of often younger people, but also most people globally agree there's a climate emergency, but also the beyond binary value, which is a long way from many of the others. These are people who strongly believe in trans rights, gender equality, LGBT rights. And in the middle is a lot of us, when fitness, interestingly, is a value, aspiring to health and fitness is a value quite close to the centre. It's not an extreme value. It's much more, along with conscious eating and individualism, it turns out to be something that is sort of more in common generally. One of the things this chart makes me think, Andrew, is that, my God, I'm glad I'm not a politician, because you're trying to please all these people. But it is interesting to look at these values, because as I say, they won't change overnight. And when we crunch those values down in 36 values into 12 trends, 2 of them relate to health and well-being, which just shows how important what you're doing is in the overall scheme of things. Out of all the things that we could ask humanity, you can see conscientious health is a key trend, choices over healthcare and health self-reliance, and also actually one of the most common trends is search for simplicity and meaning. One of the most popular apps, apart from fitness apps in the last 18 months or so, has been meditation type apps. People they feel overwhelmed by everything, they don't know where the world's going, they're worried about the future. Can I just find a way of switching off and relaxing? But certainly health and well-being are areas where we expect major change. And in terms of our values around health, if anything, we're seeing a rising prominence because of the virus. It's a health crisis, of course, so people want to do something about it. So I will sacrifice convenience if it means buying healthier products. We tested these questions out a few weeks ago just to see how much things have changed in this survey over the last year. And we could see that everywhere, even in Britain, but particularly in America and elsewhere, a real rise in the proportion of people saying, look, I need to eat well, I need to be safe. I want to eat I'll eat something that's better for me, even if it takes me a bit longer to cook it. Our motivation to do more, well, we already had 80% of people saying that they needed to do more to look after themselves physically. This year it's risen to 83%. So wanting to do the right thing, wanting to do exercise, wanting to eat well, those things, if anything, are strengthening all over the planet. The question is, of course, how you address, and many of you on this call have got some good ideas on this, the say-do gap, the gap between what we say we want to do and what we end up actually doing. That run outside when it's raining and cold is less tempting than the sofa and TV sometimes. So how do we help people do the right thing? What's interesting is that when I looked at the data, the proportion of people who said they need to do more to look after themselves physically has particularly risen, interestingly, among older people. And again, who has the virus most killed? It's killed 1 in 60 people over 90, but certainly even among younger, older people, we can see the bigger shifts in terms of wanting to do something. So there is a real willingness and interest in taking control and taking some exercise. So at 100 miles an hour, my summary on this is really that clearly lockdown was bad, and lockdown 2 is not going to be great either. And that is something that many people are going to chafe against. I think there's a real challenge about convincing people that pools and gyms are safe, and that will persist in a sense even after. And I'd be interested to know what the volumes were like once lockdown was over. But for attracting new users, that is still going to be a concern. Even the disease, the vaccine isn't going to arrive in large quantities into the general population for some time, it would seem. And so even after the second lockdown ends, if it really does end on the 2nd of December, there will still be anxiety about using those facilities. But at the same time, I think we need to identify some positive shifts. So the first is that some of these changes that we're seeing may actually be encouraging a deeper look at health, a deeper look at healthy eating, and that's something that we've seen over the last few years. And where a trend is there already, and if it's then changed by a dramatic event like the pandemic, it's even more likely to stick. So can we use this as an opportunity to get to when people are, in a way, reflecting on their circumstances? The very fact of lockdown, and again that sort of time to reflect. That what sort of world do we want to come back out into? All of those things mean that there is a psychological moment to encourage people to take stock of their levels of physical activity, then their weight. What are they happy with that? We've talked about social prescribing, but also, of course, their money is another thing that they want to reflect on. So there's a real sort of psychological moment that I think, as a sector, one might want to be part of just trying to address that. Because ultimately, one would hope that there is somewhere in all of this, there is an eventual upside. Thanks so much for your attention.
And thank you so much indeed. Can I just hold on to you for a minute to ask a couple of questions, if I may? And in particular, I was very struck. Of course, you were asking questions during the first lockdown about how safe people thought gyms were.
Yes.
And then when I was very struck when one got to end of September, early October. We were in a position where the government introduced the tiered system, and the Northwest went into tier 3. And of course, Lancashire decided to keep gyms open. Liverpool originally didn't, and Steve Rotherham, I think quite rightly, took, as it were, the temperature of what people thought about this and said, no, we want to keep gyms open. And now, I think between June and October, there's been a very big shift in terms of the way people think about their restriction on physical activity and the safety of getting back into gyms and leisure centres.
I think that's a good point. I think we are going to have to learn to manage risk. And of course, people who are familiar with gyms and know about the cleaning that's going on and who are taking precautions, etc., and actually will often feel fine. I mean, there is one of the challenges with the disease, because we do the COVID prevalence testing for the Office of National Statistics and indeed run one program of Imperial, is that between 50 to 80% of the people who we find have got the virus when we test them randomly in the population have absolutely no symptoms at all in the week before the test. And so there is this sort of unknown quantity, but I'm sure from a user point of view, a lot of people are going to feel that it's unnecessary, that they can take precautions. The difficulty is, and I'm not an epidemiologist, is that of course, you look at the numbers, and although we feel we're under control, we're clearly not in terms of levels of infection. So but it is a very blunt instrument.
Ben, in addition, holding out hope for the future is quite difficult, isn't it, at the moment, to look at something like people's attitude toward their health.
It is.
And
I think
you're somebody of my age, and you're 60 plus, and you're thinking, well, I must look after my health. Well, it's a perfectly natural thing to say now, but how long are we likely to hold on to this thought after the pandemic?
Well, I think that's a very good point, Andrew. And the blunt answer, of course, is we don't know. But I think what I was trying to say is that I think there is this use this moment. I'm determined not to go back to 97 kilos again. I'm actually, I bought the scales that connect to my phone. I'm now getting daily updates from my phone about where I am on my weight loss plan. I think there is a moment for people to a shock, and the longer this goes on, in a way, the bigger the chances that people will notice. We know that people who are overweight are more likely to die if they catch it. So I think there is a real chance that actually, this pushes people in the direction. And I think what's so striking is that people absolutely want to do the right thing. And I think how you get over those sort of barriers. I found actually, I found gyms. I still find gyms actually a bit sort of intimidating, because the people there are so serious about them. So I have a trainer, fortunately I can afford it, who comes to my house, or did until tomorrow. But I think there is. But I think I would just think that moment is there, and this is when the big relaunch happens. I think get into an alliance with the health service, with GPs. Britain wants to do this, and we can. Gyms need to sometimes be a little bit more welcoming. But that's another issue entirely, perhaps. But I think there's a big chance where you could try and get the nation doing more and use the psychological moment.
Yeah, it's a good point you make about the relationship with the health service. And of course, one of the things that has continued to be absolutely at the heart of people's response to the pandemic is the reliance on the National Health Service, appreciation for what it's doing, and a sense of obligation toward the National Health Service. Now, fortunately, UK Active have got relationships with the National Health Service that are much stronger now, things like the social prescribing. And I would just remind our participants that on Wednesday, the 25th of November, we're hoping our keynote speaker at this time will be Professor Chris Whitty. And I think that might well be a very interesting discussion to think about the longer term and about how the NHS in the pandemic and after it can be assisted by the increase in physical activity and improvements in health that come from it.
Well, Andrew, you know this stuff so well, obviously, as a former health secretary. And I think that the challenge is that the health service, which we've talked about in Britain for decades, moving the health service from being an illness service to a wellness service. I mean, I'm afraid we're going to come out of this pandemic with a backlog of illness and stuff to deal with. There's alarming estimates about the number of people who have cancer diagnoses that will be missed as a result of what's happened this year and all of that. But absolutely, but we do seem to have a real challenge in making that sort of mental shift about just, both as a country and also, and to be in fairness, the culture, some of it is the culture of the NHS, where surgeons seem to have far more weight than public health people.
I'm afraid that is true. Ben, forgive me, time is against us. An absolutely fascinating presentation. Can I, on behalf of all of those watching and listening at home, thank you very much indeed for your participation. Much appreciated it.
Pleasure.
Can I jump ahead on our agenda and use this moment to introduce to you a message that we've received from the Deputy Mayor of London, the Deputy Mayor who is responsible for social integration, social mobility and community engagement in London. So delighted to have a message from Dr. Debbie Weeks-Bernard, Deputy Mayor of London.
Hello everyone. It's great to be speaking at UK Active's National Summit today, even though it feels unusual to be speaking to you from behind a screen. I joined City Hall in 2018 as Sadiq Khan's Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement. A core part of this work has been our investment in community sport through our £8.8 million programme Sport Unites. I was new to the sports sector, but quickly convinced by its power to change people's lives for the better. It's difficult not to be when you work for a huge sport fan like Sadiq. Many of you will know he's a massive Liverpool supporter. Yes, you heard me right, Liverpool, not Arsenal. As mayor, he has put sport and physical activity at the heart of his work, in improving social integration, reducing serious youth violence and tackling inactivity. 2 years ago, when we published our strategy for sport and physical activity, we knew London faced real social challenges: inactivity, social isolation and mental health, to name a few. We also knew that these challenges disproportionately affected our most vulnerable communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed and exacerbated these inequalities. Our top priority is to deliver a programme that helps London recover from the pandemic and tackle these inequalities. Our commitment to using sport and physical activity as part of this programme remains. From improving people's mental health and well-being to reducing social isolation, sport remains a critical intervention in supporting Londoners through the pandemic and beyond. I know how difficult this year has been for you. In May, research by SportEd showed that 1 in 4 community sport organisations might not survive 6 months. 6 months on, some of those organisations didn't survive. Many freelance coaches and support staff fell through the gaps of the government's financial package. Many facilities saw drastic losses of income from their community assets when the government could have better utilised these spaces to aid the COVID-19 response during lockdown. The Mayor and I have consistently called on better financial support from government to support community sport organisations and facilities. Whilst there are serious challenges ahead and a lot more work to do, I remain optimistic about this sector. Optimistic because of the way you have responded to this crisis. So many of you are so much more than just a sports or fitness club for people. you act as a lifeline for so many. From digitalising sessions, running food banks, and delivering hyper-localised programmes, the community sports sector has stepped up to support some of our most vulnerable people. The ways in which you've adapted your support, added to the invaluable services you've always provided, makes your work even more crucial to Londoners in the weeks and months ahead. The Mayor and I will continue to support you and the work you do as we move towards recovery. The role of physical activity and sport is just as important, if not more so, in building resilient communities in London and supporting people's well-being. To date, we've taken steps to support you to continue delivering throughout the pandemic. The Mayor released £5 million in funding through London Community Response to help community projects that supported the most vulnerable Londoners. We delivered our Talking COVID-19 and Sport webinar series with London Sport to help the sector access financial assistance and plan for the future. The Mayor was also the first to deliver a toolkit for grassroots organisations in delivering socially distant sport. We'll continue to do everything we can to support you and the vital work that you do. I've been impressed by your creativity and flexibility during the pandemic, and I want to continue working with you to find new and creative ways to support Londoners. In my 2 years at City Hall, I've learnt so much about the power of sport, and I've never been more convinced by its potential. I will work collaboratively with you to shape City Hall's future work in sport, and I'm excited to see what discussions take place at this summit. This year has been tough. The challenges are real, but you are all part of the solution. The Mayor and I said in 2018, we were committed to harnessing the power of sport to change lives. That commitment is ever more important today. I hope you have a really great conference. Thank you.
I gave an introduction to Jo Stevens, but I'm going to do a very short one now. We're delighted to have Jo Stevens, Member of Parliament for Cardiff Central, with us, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. Jo, if you're able now to unmute and we're able to connect to you, I'm delighted to have you with us at the UK Active National Summit. Jo, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and apologies for the digital problems. It's always rather embarrassing when you hold a it's always embarrassing when you hold a portfolio that involves digital and your digital doesn't work. So sorry for the difficulties beforehand, and thank you for accommodating the change time as a result. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to Tammy for inviting me to speak today. I'm sorry we can't do this in person. But I hope maybe this time next year that we can. It was a real pleasure to listen to both Tam and Ben's contributions and have a more and better insight in the value of sport and being active. It's something I'm very passionate about and determined that the next Labour government places at the heart of our national well-being, both physical and mental. And in the meantime, I hope that we can persuade the UK government to do the same. Obviously, it's very important at the moment to be having these discussions as England goes into its second lockdown tonight. Andrew mentioned I'm the Member of Parliament for Cardiff Central, and so in Wales we have already gone into our lockdown, and we come to the end of our 17-day lockdown on Monday next week. During the first lockdown, being active and continuing to exercise and trying to get that activity in every day was so important. And for me personally, and I know for many of our constituents, there's been a much more difficult approach to that during the second lockdown. So thinking about how that can be achieved, how we can fit that space and time to exercise in the restricted way that we can into our plans in advance is a really important element of preparing for the next 4 weeks and whatever restrictions may or may not be in place after that. So we'll need to be creative in our thinking and our approach, and that's something that I'll go on to talk about shortly. Now, you are an expert audience. You don't need to tell you about the huge benefits that being active can bring. But for policymakers and decision makers in government who control the money and the levers of government, that sometimes feels like it's trotted out as a truism without engagement with what it actually means. And for me, that means, for example, a 6-7-year-old widower seeing his friends at bowls club, or a new mum whose swimming group gives her the confidence to get back in the water after giving birth, or the football club that becomes a safe place for a teenager when being at home is not a safe or ideal place to be. You know, sport, physical exercise and activity is so much more than just those words. And so for policymakers and the decision makers to see it truly as a cross-government issue, we really need to push home the cross-departmental benefits and the cross-society benefits that it brings. You know, we know that it brings economic, societal, health and prosperity benefits to the nation, to people individually, but also to the country collectively. COVID has placed one huge barrier in front of us at the moment, but I wanted to think about pre-COVID barriers to sport and physical exercise too, and address those, and how, as we come out of COVID, look to the future, we break down those barriers in the medium to longer term. I was smiling as I was listening to the previous speeches. I was a lawyer before I was a member of Parliament, so it would surprise you to hear that I like to consider evidence before thinking about development of policy, and it was good to hear Ben and Tammy also talk about value of evidence. I know that's not a popular approach with all politicians, but never underestimate the prevalence of unintended consequences in lots of policy making and in lots of laws that are produced in our Parliament. And I think what's really interesting is that if we look at the data from the first lockdown, you know, we see, according to Sport England, that activity levels on average dropped in the first 7 weeks of lockdown. I think, as Ben mentioned, 3 million fewer active adults compared to the same period a year ago. But if we look more closely at the figures from their Active Lives survey, we see that some people found more time to exercise than they had done in their day-to-day lives previously. Now, you know, maybe that was because they weren't spending time commuting, or maybe they had few things to do in the evenings. Many felt that when they were only allowed to exercise for an hour a day or once a day, and certainly I felt this as well, that it was really valuable time and something to be made the most of. So we thought about it carefully and we were more prepared. And indications are that women found it easier to adapt, for example, to online and home alternatives, and as such saw a smaller drop in their fitness activity. Conversely, men are much more likely to take part in team and racket sports than women, and both of those obviously were very severely restricted during the lockdown period and saw large drops as well. Some people found that they exercised less because they just didn't have the time because of juggling work with homeschooling and their particular domestic circumstances. Or it might be that the type of exercise that they enjoyed doing, for example, if they normally went to a swimming pool or if they played sport as part of the team, that all became off limits. It was also more difficult for people who needed extra support, whether that was from an instructor or from a group, to help them and motivate them to exercise. But also what was striking to me for Sport England data was that it showed that those people who found it more difficult to be active were people who already found it difficult anyway. And so, like very many other issues across this pandemic, it highlighted existing divides in the country. And a lot of these divides won't surprise anyone. They're often to do with money and to the related deficiency of time. And there's plenty of evidence, we know, plenty of evidence available about wealth inequality and its correlation with low participation in sport and exercise. So more than 750,000 fewer adults from lower social groups were meeting the active threshold across mid-March to mid-May compared to the same period 12 months ago. People who have gardens, for example, could take advantage of that relative privacy for exercise, as they might have had more access to things like equipment. You know, we all remember the stories about how impossible it was to buy a set of dumbbells during the first lockdown. And access to equipment is an obvious problem, a very visible problem. But in most cases, you know, thinking creatively, there is a way around that. So whether it's doing bicep curls with tins of beans, or whether it's using your dressing gown cord as a yoga belt, those visible barriers we can overcome with that creative thinking, but many of the invisible barriers are much harder to tackle. People find it difficult to do exercise because of all sorts of reasons, whether it's disabilities that are physical or otherwise, or not having the confidence to take the first step, or a lack of motivation or experience, or cultural barriers. And for me, that's why public health messaging, and particularly during the pandemic, is so critical, and in my view, have taken sufficient account of those invisible barriers. So when the Prime Minister contracted COVID earlier this year and was very upfront and honest about his physical fitness levels and his weight problem, ministers were very keen to encourage all of us, the public, to lose weight, as we learned that obesity was a huge factor in people having more severe COVID symptoms and lower recovery rates. And while that aim is admirable, we know that losing weight for many people is not as simple as it seems. You know, I pay tribute to Ben. I was very impressed with what you described. I wish I had done so well. But my challenge to government on their public health messaging is to think more about those invisible barriers and how they can be overcome when they're developing their messages. So when we say to people, you know, eat better and exercise more, I mean, most of us know we should be doing that anyway. And the reasons why many people don't is often myriad and deep-rooted. And associating exercise so closely with weight loss can be counterproductive, with activity then being seen as punishment or a chore rather than something to be celebrated and enjoyed. In theory, a lot of people have the ability just to leave their front door and go for a run around their local park. And in theory, you know, you might just need a pair of trainers, a bit of simple running kit to do that. But we know it's much more complex than that. Couch to 5K and Park Run have been absolutely brilliant at knocking down those barriers. Look at the amazing job that Joe Wicks did as the nation's PE teacher. I discovered muscles that I hadn't used, I think, for 30 years, joining in with Joe Wicks's classes in the morning. But Joe also exposed the gaps in our public health messaging. It took Joe Wicks to do that rather than a public information campaign from government. And I think we need to learn lessons from that. Another issue that COVID has brought into sharp focus is the digital divide. Lots of exercise has been taking place through Zoom and through other online portals. And there are a lot of people who finally got round to getting their heads around the iPad they had for Christmas and getting it working and understanding it. My mum was one of those. But for others who don't have the digital skills to do that, get very, very nervous about using technology. It means they're not able to access online classes and similar. There are nearly 2 million households in the UK with no access to the internet. There are another 150,000 households in broadband not spots, as we call them, and 20% of households are located in hard to reach areas. So if you don't have internet access, you are immediately excluded. And for those areas where the broadband is just not good enough, it's another reason to avoid, not to bother with an exercise class online because it's so frustrating. You know, and for lots of people, me included, you know, if you can find an excuse not to do that run or not to go out on your bike or not to do the exercise class online, quite often find them. So that's just one of many reasons why government needs to deliver on its promise of access to fast, affordable broadband, and to properly invest in digital skills for all to reduce those gaps. So tonight, second lockdown in England is upon us. It will be harder for people to exercise simply because of the time of year. And the toll that this will have on people's physical and mental health is what keeps me awake at night, apart from last night with the worry of a Trump election win, and probably tonight as well. But we know the widespread health problems across the population that have been piling up as a consequence of the first lockdown. You know, we're hearing about this all the time, the legacy of hospital appointments that's happening and people not going to see their GPs. So it's more important than ever that sport and exercise needs to be placed by government right at the front and centre of the plan to get us through the pandemic, to get us out of the side of it and into a fitter, healthier and more productive future as individuals and as a nation. Because we know that through sport, we learn such important life skills: leadership, teamwork, resilience, improved focus, sportsmanship, and so much more. And I saw that when, as part of British Sport Week with UK Active, when I went to Fulham Reach Rowing Club, seeing young men doing rowing for the first time in their lives and just seeing their faces light up the minute they got it and it worked and the timing was right. I started moving at speed through the water, a really incredible way to build those valuable life skills. So I'm going to finish up with the start of a plan, that I hope to build on, that we hope to build on, and I think that the whole nation hopefully can contribute to. It's 5 things to start us off. Firstly, improved public health messaging that recognises the visible and invisible barriers to participation in sport and exercise so that we increase those levels of participation. Secondly, addressing the endemic inequalities across the country to give children and adults access to sport and physical activity in their communities in as many settings as possible. Thirdly, opening up existing facilities for wider community participation, like school sports facilities. I think it's something like 38% of our sports facilities are in schools and behind those doors for many hours of the week. We need to make that available to many more people for many more hours of the day. Fourthly, ending the digital divide and empowering digital literacy to create fair access to online sport and exercise support for all ages. And finally, making sure that improving health and well-being is a consideration in decision-making across government departments. And just to give a plug to what we do in Wales, our Future Generations Act, where we look at those specific things as part of every piece of legislation produced out of the Senedd, is revolutionary, and I hope that it will be something that we'll adopt across the whole of the UK. So that's my prescription for the nation's health and well-being. Hope we get to write it in 2024, but I hope that we can all work on a cross-party basis to make sure that we're putting health and well-being, sport and physical exercise at the heart of our plan to get through COVID and out the other side into a better place. Thank you.
Jo, thank you very much indeed for that. And I think you admirably demonstrated how the digital culture, media and sport brief takes you into the heart of current thinking about policy, not only in digital culture, media and sport actually, but stretching right across the political field. So thank you very much. Great 5 points that I know that the listeners will be very interested and very much in agreement with those 5 points, and more power to your elbow as you're doing that. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Jo. I might say next week when we are together with further discussions in the summit next Wednesday, it's about measuring effective interventions in health, and actually that will, I think, give you, I hope, much of that information which will help to strengthen your 5th point about improving health and well-being something which is at the heart of policy making. And I hope that next week's discussions will help you in that. Can I turn now and invite Rebecca Marmot, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever, and in that context, somebody who has great experience of thinking about transformational change in one of our leading companies, but also transformational changes at the heart of our discussion today. So Rebecca, could I invite you now to talk to the UK Active National Summit, and very much welcome you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Rebecca. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to Jo. It was inspirational to hear about how the government has a plan to get everybody moving and into exercise. I'm delighted to join you all. I wish it was in person, But of course, this is our new normal, now. I hope everyone is healthy and well. As I'm sure you've heard earlier today, these are such extraordinary times. More than ever, we really need to think about taking good care of ourselves and taking good care of each other. UK Active's work to promote health and well-being through all the brilliant campaigning that you do and the partnerships is so crucial at the moment. I'm personally a runner. It's a huge part of my life, not just because of the physical exercise, but that massive mental boost that we all get in different ways, but is I think delivered from exercise in such a hugely rewarding way. Unilever, although working in a different sector, we completely share your commitment to making progress on these crucial issues. Our mission as a business is to make sustainable living commonplace. And we do that by helping to improve people's health and well-being, which is what I wanted to focus on today, decoupling our growth from our environmental footprint and increasing our positive social impact. I think we do that by approaching business in a different way. So it's really leveraging the long-term multi-stakeholder business model is what we call it. So not just thinking about shareholder return, which of course is hugely important, but thinking about all of our stakeholders. So our own employees, our people, suppliers, retailers, thinking about the planet, society, government. We've got 400 brands at Unilever. We serve 2.5 billion people around the world every single day in 190 countries. So that means we can use our scale and reach to really help to drive transformational change in a positive way, but we need to get it right. It's a big responsibility. I really believe that business can and should be a force for good. And actually companies have a big duty and they've got a capacity to act on some of these huge macro level challenges facing us all at the moment. So as I said, I'd like today to focus my remarks on our strategy for driving progress and talk specifically about health and wellbeing activities. We know that if we want to work and really make a change across the ecosystem, we need to concentrate in every single part of that process. So really it's 4 key stages for us. It's making sure that we get our own house in order. It's working across our value chain. So from the sourcing of our crops and commodities, working with farmers in the field, through to the manufacturing process, the distribution and sales, thinking about how to move that whole process in consumer goods into a circular model, really thinking about reuse and eliminating waste. The third area is using the power of our brands in a much more purposeful way and activating partnerships to roll out programs that really bring all of this to life on the ground. And then the last area, working for systems level change. So if I take the recent COVID-19 outbreak as an example, when the pandemic struck, we took immediate action to support our employees. So health and safety protocols, PPE, thinking about extra health provision in our factories. And of course, for our employees working at home, I'm lucky that I can do my job based out of the house and really thinking about mental health. In the value chain, that meant ensuring job security and wages for all of our contractors. We provided $500 million in cash flow relief across our extended value chain. So things like early payment for small suppliers, extending credit to small scale retailers. Then thinking about how to use the power of our brands to really accelerate public awareness in response and help people to cope with the pandemic. So for example, brands like Lifebuoy soap, the hand washing campaigns, which have reached over 1 billion people in the past few years. How could we adapt, and did we adapt the messaging and the advertising? Good hygiene programs with brands like Domestos around the importance of good sanitation practice. And then working with lots of different partners like UNICEF, with Gavi, Save the Children. We contributed 100 million euros worth of soaps and sanitizers, bleaches, food to help those most in need around the world. But I think it's this systems level action across society and really thinking about things like behaviour change that we just heard Joe talking about, which is a focus that we share very closely with you and the audience who are listening today. So as an example of that, we launched a £100 million hygiene and behaviour change coalition platform that's going to reach 1 billion people around the world with behaviour change and hygiene interventions in partnership with the UK government's FCDO. So really, I think a good example of bringing in expertise and skills from the private sector in behaviour change and technical expertise, government reach in terms of diplomacy and a big network obviously across the world, and then the skills of our NGO and UN agency partners to be able to roll out interventions at speed on the ground. And I think working in that much more joined up way allows us from a Unilever perspective to move at speed and scale, really have maximum impact. And I think here in the UK, as we head into another lockdown tonight, tomorrow morning, we know that it's even more important than ever before. We had this in the summer. It's a demoralizing time for so many people. It's really important that we now work together to help people maintain their physical, mental, and their emotional health. The pandemic's placing huge strain on all of us. We've got to play our part to support people during these challenging times. So I thought it might help if I just referenced a couple of examples where our brands are activating their purpose around trying to improve people's health and well-being. So it could be through things like Rexona, one of our deodorant brands. We've been promoting physical activity, similar to what we just heard Joe talking about with Joe Wicks, for example, over the summer, with Rexona doing that through their Move More at Home initiative. So we've got €1 million fund helping support fitness instructors to connect with new audiences online, really enabling them to continue to earn a living while, of course, improving all of our fitness. In the UK, here in the UK, our UK deodorant brand Shaw has teamed up with this Girl Can campaign, already reaching 3 million people, particularly focused on helping girls and women to take more physical exercise and trying to break down some of the barriers as to why that might not have been the case beforehand. But we know as well, it's not just about physical health, it's also about tackling mental health issues, as important as working to protect our own physical health. Never before have we faced a challenge at the scale of COVID-19 that's shone a spotlight on the widespread issues around mental health. And I think in particular, it's continued to highlight some of those inequalities that are based on gender and race and poverty. Before the pandemic, the cost of poor mental health around the world was costing in excess of $1 trillion to the global economy. And sadly, I think we all know that, unfortunately, that will have increased over the past few months. I think left unchecked, the human and economic costs will be even greater. So we have a responsibility not just to look after our own people, but also to encourage others to look after their own mental health. And again, I think where we've really tried to do this successfully has been using the power of some of our brands to lead the kind of change that we want to see. So for many years now, our Dove brand have had their self-esteem program, which really tries to demonstrate, particularly to young girls and to women, that beauty is actually, it comes from a source of confidence. It's not anxiety about the way that we look. It's not about physical appearance. Their mission is to help the next generation grow up enjoying a much more positive relationship with the way that they look, helping young people to realize their full potential. So far, we've reached about 60 million people in 142 countries. We've run things like cartoon series. We have lots of different advertising campaigns. We run programs with youth groups, really trying to improve self-confidence and really boost self-esteem. Another one of our brands, Lipton, encourages people to take time just to have a cup of tea. By speaking with friends and family, it makes us all feel a little bit more connected in what at the moment can feel a very disconnected and very separated and sometimes disparate world. And it's really, really important. Just that simple act of stopping for 5 minutes and being able to have a virtual cup of tea with somebody can't be underestimated. I think we all have a role to play to challenge the stigma of mental health and really to advocate for more action. So I'm proud of the work that we've tried to do in this health and wellbeing area. But when the team invited me to speak to you today, I know they were also interested to hear about our learnings from how, as we've tried to run our business with sustainability really at the core, what kind of challenges have we faced? And I think the interesting overlap with the work that UK Active are doing is very much around the area of learning around behaviour change and habit change. We're always looking to learn from others, learn from other people's experiences and look at how we can integrate change in a different way so that we can go on to achieve more. So I think when I look back at what we have managed to achieve when we put sustainability front and centre, we've done a lot of great work around changing the way that we do our sourcing. We've done a lot of work around manufacturing, but I think trying to influence consumer behaviour change, and we've just heard everything that Joe Stevens was talking about with the challenges of encouraging us all to adopt good exercise habits. We found that in influencing consumer behaviour is sometimes really, really hard to achieve. When we launched our first set of sustainability targets back in 2010, we made some huge leaps forward, but actually we now realize that we need to focus on how we change the system around us. So for example, we changed the way we did our sourcing and our manufacturing to really try and reduce the total carbon footprint of our products. But what we need to do as well is to get consumers to change the way, for example, they wash their clothing. That means if you're using a washing machine, use a quick wash cycle, or it means taking a quick shower instead of a long hot shower. But it's really hard to get people to change behavior. People like to have long hot showers. People don't always want to wash clothes at a lower temperature and put it on the quick wash cycle. So I think a lot of the learnings that we have around behavior change and some of the ideas that we've come up with to try and tackle that will be useful to your audience, and I'll come back to those in a second. I think equally trying to measure the success of social programs is also very difficult, really being able to show progress on the kind of targets and KPIs that we're setting ourselves. So for us, taking an example from Unilever's business, we know, for example, that washing hands at key points during the day can really help to reduce life-threatening incidents of dysentery and diarrhea in developing countries. And we all know at the moment, wherever we live in the world, that washing hands is one of the most important things that we can do to combat COVID. But we can't always isolate the other contributing factors to really know how important the individual element of hand washing is. So really trying to work out how to do that and measure that to ensure that then when we're rolling out programs, we do it in the most effective way. So what we've developed over time is what we call the 5 levers for change, really looking at how can we develop and implement behavior change programs that have effective and long-lasting impact. So I thought I'd share that as a useful reference point for the audience today, given that ultimately we're both interested in looking at how you could achieve sustainable behavior change. So for us, the first lever includes 1, make it understood. Sometimes people don't necessarily even know about a behavior, and why should they do it? So you need to help to raise awareness and encourage acceptance. Number 2 is make it easy. It's much more likely that people will adopt an action if it's easy and it doesn't require a huge amount of extra effort. It's got to be convenient and it's got to be something that people will embark on with confidence. I think number 3, make it desirable. Whatever the new behavior is that you're trying to encourage others to adopt, it needs to fit with how people want to think of themselves and what they want others to think of them. It's really about your own self and about society. Number 4 is make it rewarding. New behaviors need to articulate really tangible benefits that people care about, people want to see. If I'm putting in all this effort and I'm trying to change what I'm doing, I kind of need to see the proof points. I want to know that all this hard work is going to pay off. And number 5 is make it a habit. We all know how difficult it is. Everybody has good intentions about doing more exercise, about eating a healthier diet, about getting more sleep. But actually, you've got to try and create a strategy to help hold the behavior in place over time, really constantly reinforcing and reminding. So I hope that provides a bit of inspiration for the brilliant work that you're doing at UK Active, and actually will help to inform some of the public health recommendations I know you intend to submit to the government following all of this conference. So to conclude, a few final observations. We all know that society and the economy has undergone a hugely rapid transformation in the past 6 to 8 months with COVID-19. We're all struggling to adjust exactly to what that new normal means. Equally, we've seen great examples of constructive collaboration across the private sector with government, with civil society, aimed at protecting lives and livelihoods. So, from a business perspective, whether that's consumer goods manufacturers like Unilever, we've been producing huge amounts of hand sanitizer, giving it straight to ministries of health around the world. Could be the fashion industry stepping up and making masks, engineering sector building ventilators. I think all of this has taught us that companies with really strong ESG credentials are in fact far more resilient. That real emphasis on the S, on the social, even more important than it has been before. And when we think about how can we, all of us, business, society, government, how can we contribute to that building back better, which we hear so much about, the stimulus packages that are in place, protecting people's livelihoods when hopefully we start to see some light at the end of the tunnel with COVID. It's also worth bearing in mind that we have that big global plan in place with the Sustainable Development Goals to act as an overarching framework. So worth at least $12 trillion, 380 million jobs by 2030, at a time when all of us around the world really need that boost the most. I think businesses that understand and support that agenda are delivering better business performance. This is a different way of approaching business. It's about sustainable growth. It builds greater customer loyalty. It really helps to build brand value and reputation. It's crucially important for attracting and retaining top talent. And it helps to drive a much stronger focus on innovation with sustainability absolutely at the core, and new kinds of products and services. I think if there's one lesson that we take away from COVID, it's actually now is the time for business to get on board, to think about operating in this different way and really get behind this decade of action with the COP here in the UK next year, Biodiversity Summit, and really stepping towards in a much more collective way with society and with government to deliver on those long-term 2030 goals. So thank you very much for inviting me today. I could talk about this agenda for hours. I'm hugely passionate about the work that you're doing and about the belief in really encouraging people to stay healthy and fit and active, both physically, mentally, and of course emotionally during this crisis. So thank you again for inviting me, and I wish everybody well over the next few months. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and I know there are many businesses listening to you talking about the way Unilever has been approaching this, who will really value the insights that you've given us about thinking about sustainability and putting it at the heart of how you operate as a business. And I might say, I think very much with you and understanding absolutely what you're saying about those 5 points, because I think that's the day-to-day experience of people working with those who are in gyms and leisure centres and thinking about themselves and their families and society and how their improvements in health and well-being can be achieved and sustained. I think that's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca.
Thank you.
May I move on now to a message from Joe Fitzpatrick, who is the member of the Scottish Parliament from Dundee City West and Minister for Public Health, Sport and Wellbeing in the Scottish Government. A message from Joe Fitzpatrick.
Hello, I'm Joe Fitzpatrick, the Minister for Public Health, Sport and Wellbeing in the Scottish Government. I want to thank UK Active for the opportunity to address the summit during what continues to be a very challenging time for the sport and leisure sector. I know the sector has been making tough decisions and businesses have had to adapt to deal with the crisis. I was pleased that the date for reopening of indoor sport and leisure was brought forward, and I want to take this opportunity to thank UK Active for the vital role that it played in the planning and preparations for the safe return to sport and leisure in accordance with the Scottish Government's route map. It's encouraging to see that over 1 million visits to leisure facilities since reopening, and a high level of confidence in those returning that they are in a safe environment. I know my officials continue to have a constructive dialogue with UK Active around how reopening is going and wider financial issues. Since the start of the COVID-19 outbreak, the Scottish Government has worked closely with the UK Government and private and public sector partners to develop a range of support mechanisms for businesses, and I know many of you will have accessed this support. However, we have been clear that the Scottish Government needs appropriate fiscal levers in order to respond effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is equally true for local government, which is why I'm pleased that we've been able to deliver a package of support for local services worth up to £750 million. In addition, we're close to finalising the details of additional financial support through a lost income scheme worth an estimated £90 million. For trusts delivering services on behalf of councils, this can also be topped up with £49 million of additional funding already confirmed. I also want to take this opportunity to recognise the important role UK Active members not only play in sport and leisure provision, but in communities that need access to these services now more than ever as we recover from the pandemic, especially in communities which have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So, thank you again for your continued support during these challenging times, and I hope that you have a productive summit. Thank you.
Joe, thank you very much. I'm delighted also now, and as our last of our keynote speakers, to introduce Andy Burnham. Since 2017, Andy has been the Mayor of Greater Manchester, and of course before that he had a highly distinguished career as a Labour Party MP, and indeed as a member of the Cabinet, as Chief Secretary of the Treasury, as Culture Secretary, and as Health Secretary. And I might say, just speaking personally, I remember as his shadow back in 2009, of course. I recall how he worked in a collaborative and cooperative fashion with me as his shadow when he was dealing with the swine flu epidemic then. It's been observed, I think, from time to time, quite rightly, that Andy is one of those senior political figures, perhaps the only senior political figure in the country now who has dealt with an epidemic in the past. And he did so in a very collaborative way. And I think perhaps the present government might, from time to time, take a leaf out of Andy's book. So it is a very great pleasure to welcome you to our UK Active National Summit. Please, Andy Burnham. Andy, are you able to unmute? Brilliant. Can you unmute, Andy?
I'm getting there, Andrew. Made it.
Thank you.
Made it. And it's really great to see you, actually. Thank you for your kind words then, Andrew. And I'll just return the favour because you a very good support, but a constructive challenge during the swine flu pandemic. And I certainly remember the conversations we had. So it really is great to see you. And thank you for what you said. I've addressed this August conference a number of times, and it's great to be back with you again, sadly in just digital form this year. But it's been a difficult year, to say the least, hasn't it, for everybody, and particularly for the industry. And I fully recognise that. Not a great day to be meeting, with obviously closures lying ahead of us from tonight. Good news in respect of the furlough situation, which has been resolved at 80%, and support for people who are self-employed. But still, it's a difficult time. But I want to start by kind of thinking about some of the positives of this time. Of course, we've seen in Sport England's figures impacts on levels of activity. Certainly, we were going great guns pre-COVID with the increase we were seeing in Greater Manchester. We put it at the heart of everything that we do, and I think you've heard me say this before. Increasing levels of physical activity are very much at the heart of everything we want to achieve for our city region. We think the pathway to good physical and mental health starts with being regularly physically active. And although we've seen some interruption to our plans this year, I think the positive is that people are thinking more now about getting out and about. I certainly see people out running, walking, cycling that I've never seen in my community before. We do have the emphasis from the government on active travel and cycling in particular, which I think has been a real positive coming out of this year. We have in development with our Cycling and Walking Commissioner, Chris Boardman, the largest segregated cycling network in the UK, the B network. And we are hoping to have built 50 kilometres or more of that by the end of next year. So we're really cracking on with that at the moment, alongside plans to deliver a bike hire scheme in Greater Manchester by the spring of next year. I do think this year will mark a change for active travel, as we call it. And with people perhaps staying more local when we come out of this crisis, working more from home, I think there is the opportunity to allow people to use more of the time they would have spent commuting perhaps going to the gym, getting out and about, getting physically active. So I see real opportunities here coming out of this crisis to change the way we live, change the way we move in our communities. And I think it will have that long-term beneficial impact. Just to say a bit more about how we are viewing things here. So obviously we have a devolution deal in Greater Manchester that's more substantial than anywhere else in the country. And the difference here compared to the GLA in London is that Greater Manchester Combined Authority is our councils. They are the 10 members of the GMCA. And I think that creates a real connection then with regard to putting physical activity at the heart of public policy, particularly with the measure of health devolution that we have. And I'm really lucky to have a group of leisure providers in Greater Manchester who are working closely with us on all of our plans. Just give you some examples. We have an amazing scheme here called Prehab for Cancer, award-winning scheme, where our leisure providers have collaborated with Greater Manchester Cancer Services to deliver a unique nutrition and exercise program, wellbeing program for people who are preparing for or recovering from major cancer surgery. And I chose this scheme recently for my Mayor's Special Award at the Greater Manchester Greater Sport Awards, because I think it really speaks to this kind of change in mentality that we need, that whoever you are, whatever position that you are in, physical activity is part of your solution. And I don't think we promote that message clearly enough at times. As Andrew will, I'm sure, agree with me in the roles that we have both held, the kind of culture of seeing, the patient rather than the person, of looking at people's problems rather than what they can still do, or indeed thinking about older people in terms of their frailty rather than in terms of their ability and their agency to stay active is a problem that we have in not just the health service but public services more generally. And I'm really keen in Greater Manchester that we kind of turn that on its head and we give the best possible physical activity support to cancer patients, but others who need support. I think getting people physically active is the first stage in a good mental health policy as well, and that includes getting young people physically active while at school. I've said, I think, before to you that I want to see the development here of the most ambitious social prescribing programme in the country that has physical activity as its first port of call, the first thing that we support people to do, and supported programmes to get physically active. I've been really struck this year how many people have mentioned to me the Couch to 5K programme. It was really connected, I think, with a huge number of people. And I would ask you in your world to think about what more we can do to use that model to give people that sort of managed step-by-step pathway towards becoming physically active, and how we kind of tailor that to all kinds of different groups who might need that extra bit of support and encouragement to become physically active. We've seen some brilliant examples this year, actually, of leisure trusts in Greater Manchester providing online courses to people during lockdown, tailored to a whole range of different abilities. Oldham Leisure and Rochdale and Stockport, just to name a few, who've been really thinking through some innovative ways in which we can make those programs available. I would say let's keep them going beyond this crisis. I think there is a growing appetite amongst the public to be physically active, and we need to make sure we take full advantage of that growing interest, and make sure we are thinking about disabled adults too, and tailoring all of our programs to everybody, so that we give an offer to all of the community. So just in terms of a kind of few more pressing things, if I may, in terms of where we go from here, I think it's a difficult picture for the government to contend with, of course, given the financial pressures on all industries. But I think it needs to be said today that the level of financial support offered to the UK fitness and leisure industry hasn't yet been anywhere near enough. And certainly I've met with leisure providers in Greater Manchester who tell me that they are really struggling now. And with council finances the way that they are, there are some doubts about the future of our leisure centres, the opening hours, the entry charges, which of course could become a barrier to physical activity if we are not careful. We've seen a major bailout for the cultural sector, but I do think we need to make the case together to ensure a proper financial package for fitness and leisure, for our gyms and for our leisure centres, which are so critical to people right now. I think more broadly then, just picking up that point I made, we also need to begin a conversation with the government about the critical importance of gyms and leisure centres through this period that we're living through. When Liverpool went into Tier 3 lockdown a few weeks ago, there was a decision taken to close gyms and leisure centres, which then wasn't followed in Lancashire, and then subsequently Liverpool argued to reopen the gyms. What I would say to the government is, let's not get into that position again. There is very little evidence that gyms and leisure centres are major sources of transmission. And we know, particularly in a time when people are living under restrictions or any form of lockdown, they are such an oasis for people to escape to. And they are so beneficial to people's mental health and well-being. So I think we need to be looking at how we keep them open all of the time and not have any doubt about that. Okay, we're in a different situation with the national lockdown, but coming out of it, let's make sure we develop a plan cross-party to keep our gyms and leisure centres open. Let's support the people who work within them. And this takes me on to another point. I said at the start, I think it's useful that the government has upped the income support to people who are self-employed to 80%, and that was a welcome announcement this week. But we know that there's many people working as freelancers within, as fitness instructors or as coaches within the sector, and they haven't been supported this year. And the self-employment scheme has too many gaps. There's people who are newly self-employed who can't be supported. So if we look across the fitness and leisure industry, I think there are a lot of people working within it who are struggling. And I certainly, for one, will be continuing to make the case that it's not fair for some people just to be left to fall through those gaps. We need a fitness and leisure industry that's ready to come roaring back into life the minute that it can. And if we don't protect both our leisure centres and the people who work within them, then we will struggle to secure that. So there is more that needs to be done to support people working within the industry. Just to, if I may, kind of conclude. I mean, from my point of view, I as I say, I've spoken to this conference for a number of years. I see what the industry is doing is just improving all of the time. The quality of the offer, the personalised support that is given to people, the integrated way in which the industry is working with other public services. If Andrew and I go back 10 years to the time when we were health and shadow health, I don't think we were in this position back then. The industry has had a really impressive decade, I think, of kind of moving some sort of the margins of consideration when it comes to public services to the heart of what we should be doing as a country. And if you throw into the mix other initiatives like Park Run and all of the other amazing things that are done in communities to get people active, then I think we've seen something of a culture change over the last 10 years. I think at a previous conference I described physical activity often as being the orphan policy of Whitehall, and it is still to some degree, but actually the industry has been banging loudly on the door in recent times, and we can now see what it can offer to a serious social prescribing service, what it can offer to cancer support service that is more linked to whole person support rather than just treating people as a patient. I think we can see now the value of a strong UK fitness and leisure sector in a way that perhaps it couldn't be seen all of those years ago. So, you know, I think you've done a brilliant job. I would say keep doing what you're doing, because you are getting heard, you are making a real difference. But in return, I think it falls to the likes of me and Andrew and other politicians to do more to champion the needs of your sector and make sure it really does get heard. So you can bank on the fact that I will continue to make the case to the government for a full financial package to support fitness and leisure going through this crisis, recognising that we still don't know how long it will last, and also recognising that leisure centres and gyms are critically, always important to communities, but critically so right now. I will argue for an evidence-based approach to any future restrictions and lockdowns. I think we should just make it clear that gyms and leisure centres are not in Tier 3, and we want to keep them open at all costs because of the benefits that they provide for people. But then the final point that I will make today is let's start laying plans for how we can put physical activity at the heart of this recovery whenever it comes, both in terms of changing our communities to make cycling and walking the first choice, but also in encouraging people who've become active perhaps for the first time in the last year to really change their lives permanently. Let's look at providing much more high quality green space within our communities, give everybody in every community somewhere to go to feel the benefits of physical activity. I think there's more we can all do on that. But, you know, overall, while it is a tough time, I would say, you know, we can look back on a year where we've made further progress, certainly a decade where we've made a massive stride forward. And I think we are well placed now to put physical activity at the heart of a recovery from COVID, where we think more about people's health and more what we need to do to build health resilience in all of our communities. We have had a tough year in Greater Manchester where COVID-19 has hit us harder than other parts of the country. And within that, it's hit our poorest communities even harder still. So what do we do about that? Well, as somebody who cares passionately about tackling health inequalities, let's come out of this crisis by truly levelling up, by going to some of our poorest communities and putting in place the facilities and the support there for people to improve their own health and improve their own resilience. That's the only right way to respond to what we've been through. You're always there with the solutions. I know that. Keep doing what you are doing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you again, and I'll hand back to you, Andrew.
Andy, thank you very much. I completely agree with you that over this last decade, UK Active and the fitness and leisure sector have really moved to the centre of thinking about public policy and improving health and well-being in so many different ways. I want to say on behalf of UK Active a very big thank you to you, Andy, for your support and the continuing support you give to the sector. I know that is very much appreciated indeed. And I think what's been really impressive in these last few months has been the way in which the mayors and city and local government has taken a centre stage in responding to the pandemic. Indeed, I suspect you would probably agree that it would have been better if they'd taken more of a centre stage at an earlier point because of the proven effectiveness of city and local government in providing services and working with their local communities to respond to the pandemic. I think that's really important. But there's some great ambitions there too. Thank you, Andy. So, for example, on the ambition for social prescribing in the future, I think really important. So thank you for that too.
Can I just say one thing in response, Andrew? Very, very
Yes.
quickly. Just agreeing very, very strongly with you. And I just have had cause in my current role a few times to think back to those difficult debates we had in around 2012 on the health service. But actually, there was one thing within the bill that you brought forward that I didn't appreciate the significance of at the time, but absolutely was the right decision. And that was to put public health under the control of local authorities. I think that was something that should have been done many years before, because I think I can see the effect of that change here in Greater Manchester, because in time it has led to an increasing health in all policies approach, rather than public services being trapped in their separate silos and physical activity always being the preserve of somebody else and not the concern of other public services. I think that change is certainly embraced here fully in Greater Manchester. And I just think it's something we need to sort of build out more across the country. When you do have public health at the heart of local government and all of the services it provides, I think it really does change the way people think and the way people work. So I just wanted to say that. And I think here, physical activity has kind of taken a step forward in its prominence within public services because of that change. And I think you deserve great credit for that.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm very glad to hear you say that. Thank you very much indeed. So the opportunity for UK Active next week is to convene again for the National Summit at 2 o'clock next Wednesday, when we will be looking at measuring and creating effective interventions in health. And as you can see, in subsequent weeks, going all the way through to Wednesday, the 25th of November, when, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be hearing, amongst others, from Professor Chris Whitty. And I think you can see that agenda ahead of you illustrates forcibly just how UK Active is not only right at the heart of thinking about public policy responses now and of supporting the sector now, but is at the heart of thinking about the future and the transformational change that physical activity can contribute to improving health and well-being for people across this country. So can I say a very big thank you to the UK Active team, and indeed especially to our keynote speakers and contributors this afternoon. We look forward very much to seeing you back with us at 2 p.m. next Wednesday. Connect to the link, as you can see, look on the Q&A for the hashtag, so that perhaps you can go on social media and tell people about the UK Active National Summit, and they will join us in future weeks as well. So thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. It's been a great pleasure to have you here. It's been an inspiring set of keynote speakers, a great leadership from Tanny Gray Thompson. Delighted to have you all with us. Thank you for today.